I don't think that a military solution is a way to destroy Hamas, and there is no way to do it through a military solution. It's only through providing an alternative to Hamas that Hamas can be weakened.
The Israeli military has confirmed it's killed the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who oversaw the October 7th attacks. Sir Keir Starmer has said the UK will not mourn his death. He said the release of all hostages, an immediate ceasefire and an increase in humanitarian aid are long overdue so that we can move towards a long-term sustainable peace in the Middle East. Well, earlier on in the programme, former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy said Sinwar's death is a chance for peace.
If they want to be removed from power in a gunfight like Yahya Sinwar, that is up to them. And if they want to surrender, that would obviously be the preferable option. But there is now an opportunity to finally bring to an end the war that Sinwar began and to turn a new leaf. And we're already seeing reports inside Gaza of celebrations among Gazan civilians who are telling, places like the New York Times, they hope Sinwar rots in hell now because of the war that he brought on them and that can now end if they surrender.
Alistair Bunkle is Middle East correspondent for Sky News. He warned that Sinwar's death might be seen as heroic in Gaza.
Sinwar was a popular figure. He was seen as the man who stood up to Israel over many years. And I think, let's go back to how he died and where he died. He's been killed in combat fatigues, not hiding in a tunnel, but above ground. And I think in some respects, it will be seen as the picture, an image of their man, their leader, who died fighting.
We'll find out a little bit more about Yahya Sinwar and what his death means in terms of Hamas and its leadership and the path forward for them or not, as the case may be. We'll do that in a few moments' time. Let's first, though, speak to Aziz Abu Sarah, who is a Palestinian peace activist and journalist. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about the response from the people in Gaza. How will they be feeling about the death of Yahya Sinwar?
I think a lot of people in Gaza would be hoping that this would lead to a ceasefire, that this would end the war. There's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. People are just done with everything going on and hoping if this is it, that it will lead to an end to all hostilities, it'll end the war, it ends the bombing. I think that's the hope, but already that hope is evaporating, as we heard Netanyahu today speaking about that the war is not over and that it's not even close to being over. So even though they might have had some hope, it's quickly going away. We already hear of bombings going on in Gaza. Reports are about 50 people being killed today in Gaza after Sinwar's killing. So not much optimism already.
Look, there have been mentions of discussions about a ceasefire, about how Hamas operatives should give themselves in, they should release the Israeli hostages, and that will bring about an end to hostilities in Gaza. Is that in any way realistic? How do you feel? It could be an indication, it could be a fear about what happens to that Hamas terror group now that their leader has been killed?
I think it's very unlikely that this is what's going on. That's to assume that killing Sinwar is really the way to destroy Hamas is overstating how Hamas operates. First, let's remember that there are leaders of Hamas still alive in Gaza and are involved, including actually Sinwar's brother, who is one of the senior leaders of Hamas. Second, you still have a lot of leaders of Hamas outside Gaza. You still have a lot of different cells and groups in Gaza of Hamas fighters who are not necessarily going to be affected by Sinwar's death and who still will carry on fighting Israel regardless. So this assumption is absolutely, it doesn't make much sense to me. I don't think, as we've talked about this before, I don't think that a military solution is a way to destroy Hamas, and there is no way to do it through a military solution. It's only through providing an alternative to Hamas that Hamas can be weakened.
And when you say providing an alternative to Hamas, what is that?
Well, if the idea, Hamas thrives on the idea that look at what Israel is doing to us, even what you just mentioned earlier, one of your correspondents, that Sinwar is going to be seen as a hero by some. He's died fighting. He wasn't hiding, as often the stories were saying. He wasn't surrounding himself by hostages to protect himself. And that's actually going to work for recruiting people, saying, see, our leaders don't hide, as Israel says. They are actually fighting, and will provide for Hamas recruitment. The alternative to that is providing a political solution. Without a political solution, Hamas will continue to thrive and will continue to be able to recruit even more fighters today than it had last week and last year and 10 years ago. Without a political solution, there is no end of Hamas.
Right. Understood. And I think it's also important to remember that in, Gaza, Hamas is the ruling party. The government is run by Hamas, and as we've sort of been leaning into, the assumption that now Sinwar is dead and all of Gaza can sort of rise up and get rid of Hamas and we can find peace in there. That is naive, isn't there? Because just like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas has followers in Gaza. As we were hearing from Alistair Bunkle, Hamas and Sinwar represent resistance against Israel. And the people in Gaza will argue that they've been put through so much by Israel that, of course, someone like Sinwar becomes heroic to them because he's seen as a resistance against Israel, who they'll argue has, taken their land, has trapped them inside the Gaza Strip, etc. So I think it's important to remember that as well, isn't it?
Yeah. You said it perfectly. I think the assumption that, everybody's going to ditch Hamas today and all the fighters of Hamas are going to leave and everyone's going to surrender and the hostages will be immediately released is being naive for people who think in this way. I think even the Israeli government obviously knows that that's not the way. Without having a deal, there will be no probably ceasefire anytime soon. And the hostages' lives also will be even potentially more a danger today than yesterday. The other thing is, right now we knew who Hamas leader is. One of the thoughts going around now is that Hamas will not announce who its next leader is, so they will not be on the assassination list. This is what Hezbollah has done. After Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated, we don't know today who's really in charge in Hezbollah. And we have not seen, just like with Hassan Nasrallah, we have not seen really Hezbollah being fully weakened, and that did not happen after Hassan Nasrallah's assassination, and I don't think we will see that in Gaza as well. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity. I think there is an opportunity to do a deal as soon as possible, and that's what should happen. I'm not confident that the Israeli government is going to do that. I don't know if the new leader of Hamas is going to be inclined to that or not. It's a potential, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Look, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate it. Aziz Abu Sarah, who is a Palestinian peace activist and journalist. Thank you. Let's speak to Simon Mabon now, who's a professor of international politics at Lancaster University, specialising in the Middle East region. Good evening to you, Simon.
Good evening.
Let's talk about who Yahya Sinwar was. And because we've not got a whole bunch of time, I had no idea, actually, that his release from prison was part of that famous Gilad Shalit prisoner swap back in 2011. Just take us to that, because it helps us to understand some of the history of the resistance of Hamas, how they came to be a terror group.
Yeah, so I guess there's a number of things going on. First of all, you've got someone here in Yahya Sinwar who had an existential hatred of Israel. Now, that was something that was cultivated over decades spent in Israeli prisons by virtue of his involvement in the quote-unquote resistance, his involvement with Hamas. And during that time in prison, he wrote things, he observed things, he learned Hebrew, for example. He articulated this real message of hate that ultimately culminated in the devastation, the horrors of October 7. So it's something that was honed for a long time, and it's that time that he spent in prison, that time that he spent talking with people, becoming a focal point in Israeli prisons, that gave him that credentials, I guess, within the hardline Hamas support group, within Hamas itself, and allowed him to rise through the ranks and to ultimately ascend to the position of leader.
And the origins of Hamas, how does he fit in with that?
Well, he joined pretty quickly after the group was formed in 1987. The group was formed during the first Intifada, the first uprising against Israel by the Palestinians, late 1980s. And he was a prominent figure, a young man, of course, back then. But during that time, he began to take a very hard line against Israel. He was involved in a number of different activities that obviously landed him in Israeli prisons for 2 decades. So, yeah, he was someone that was very, very quickly identified by both the Israelis and I guess by some figures within Hamas as someone with the potential to be a very prominent player.
Yeah, he was behind the killing of 4 Palestinians. This is what Israeli interrogators found. Behind the killing of 4 Palestinians who'd been working as informants. In 1989, sentenced to 4 life sentences, with Israeli news reports saying that he'd convinced a Hamas member to expose his own brother as an informant before burying them alive.
He took a very hard line against anyone that was collaborating with Israel, or indeed perceived to be collaborating with Israel.
Yeah. There had been some thought that prior to October 7th last year, Sinwar was becoming sort of thinking of becoming a more moderate figure, moderating Hamas as a group. Is there any strength to those rumours?
It's not something that I buy personally, to be honest. I guess ultimately we'll never know without the
But then he must have been planning the October 7th attack for a period of time. So we pretty much squash that, can't we?
I think so, yeah. It seems to have been a very deliberate strategy to lull Israel into a sense of security, a sense that Hamas had been a sort of shifting away from a military strategy, a sense that Hamas had been defeated, almost, if you will. And that sense of security allowed the conditions that gave rise to October 7. So, yeah, I don't buy the sense that he was becoming a more moderate figure. Yeah. It doesn't tally.
What do we know about him in the October 7th attacks? He's been described as the person behind it. Do we assume, because it completely surprised Israel, do we assume that he was an intelligent operator, I suppose, in order to get that attack over the line, sadly, horribly, horrifically?
Yeah, so it looks like there's a couple of things at play here. One, that he was the real mastermind behind it. That's what the reports are suggesting. Very, very quickly, it was suggested that it was him who was behind it. And if you recall back just over a year ago now, there were very clear signals that Iran was not involved in October 7 itself. And now that discourse has shifted a great deal. But even from those very early days, it was Yahya Sinwar that was the one that was believed to be responsible. Now, the other thing is that in this masterminding process, he's obviously taken a very different line to that taken by Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah, in the sense that he seems to have gone sort of retreated back from technology. So we know that Hezbollah used walkie-talkies and we used pagers that were ultimately compromised. But what Yahya Sinwar seems to be doing is going analog, if you will, and just relying on person-to-person communication,
notes.
sending messages.
Yeah,
exactly.
Handwritten notes, extraordinary. Look, really interesting to speak to you. Thank you. Simon Maybon, Professor of International Politics at Lancaster University. Good to have you on. Thank you.